Welcome to Growthcast, Insights for B2B leaders. Today we have a very special guest in the sales leadership world, Bash. Nice to have you today.
Alex, thank you for having me.
My pleasure to have you as a guest. For our audience's sake, do you mind doing a brief introduction around yourself and how you got here?
Yeah, sure. So I realized I had a knack for sales really when someone came knocking on my door when I was 14 years old, and they were selling these cleaning products. And they threw a catalog through the door, and then they came and they knocked a couple days later to try and try and sell what they could. And I actually, instead of looking to buy, I was thinking, I needed a pair of speakers at the time and I needed an amplifier. And it was quite a lot of money for a 14-year-old. Like it was a five, £600 I needed in total. So I asked the guy, how can I get on board? How can I get in and make some money? And essentially it was like a pyramid scheme. But nevertheless, I signed up. I think I spent like 120 pounds in buying the starter kit, which gave me a whole bunch of catalogs, and he gave me a couple training sessions on how to canvas. They carved out a territory for me, local
Yeah.
to myself. So pretty much three evenings a week after school on weekends, that's what I was doing for 6 months. And I made the money that I needed, I think, within 2, 3 months, and I just kept going. Um, and and that's when I learned that okay, this sales thing might pay off. And then when I was 16 at college, um, I I went to work for Phones for You at the time. It was a John Caldwell
Okay.
company, part of Single Point. And within a few months, working just Friday afternoons after college and weekends, I I started to beat all the full timers in terms of sales for phones. And it was during the time, showing my age now, when people were buying their first phones. So we're going back to Nokia's and Ericsson's
Yeah.
at the time. And I really enjoyed it. And you know what you typically do well, what you enjoy, and vice versa. So so I went through uni, I went through college, I went through uni. I dropped out of uni for personal reasons, and I needed to go back into sales. And I did a couple of sales jobs, random sales jobs, but then I bumped into my first B2B sales role at the time of the company called Percussion. And they had a very interesting model. In your first 3 months, your first month you had to do a deal, your second month you had to do 3 deals, and your third month you had to do 25K. And apparently I was one of the few that actually managed to do their 3 months of targets consecutively. And each month you got a pay rise by doing so. So that was really the beginning of it. And I've been now in sales for 20 years. About half of that has been in leadership. And I've stepped in and out of sales, between sales and leadership as I went up from SMB to enterprise. And and I also found that that's generally just been very useful to doing that, because I think once you've been in leadership for a long time, you could lose real empathy with sales. You become quite ideological. You start to be a little bit too textbook.
Yeah.
So I think being in the trenches keeps you real, keeps you sharp, and I really enjoy the customer interaction part of it, which is
Yeah.
why I've always enjoyed more than anything first line leadership.
Yeah.
So
Definitely, that sounds
I've
very
been
interesting.
now with Streetbees for 4 years, for the past four and a bit, and for the past 3 years I've been leading sales for the entire business, and about to step into MongoDB in their acquisition part of the business, which is the hardest part, really,
Yeah.
right? It's going after global logos in the Nordics and the Benelux region.
Sounds very exciting. So you've had quite a robust career over the last 20 years. Just to rewind at the start, you did door-to-door sales, probably one of the hardest types of sales. I've done it before selling windows, which is
Mm.
imagine how hard that is. Um, what were some of the lessons you learned from doing retail door-to-door that translated into B2B and enterprise? Because there's different types of sale.
Yeah, I would probably sum it up into three things. Number one, it's you only have one chance to make a great first impression.
Yeah,
Um, Number two, it's how you connect with people as quickly as possible, right? And that means you have to be very resilient as well. I've learned to take 9 out of 10 as a no, right? And that thickens your skin.
Yeah.
And I think those things were completely transferable to what I do in B2B and how I coach others to be as well. But also it is a numbers game as well, right? You've got to be strategic about how you, in my case back then, how I canvassed, how I planned which roads to hit at which days, and then when do I revisit, when do I knock, and so on. And yeah, just like you have barriers to overcome in B2B, I had dogs to deal with, I had angry people to deal with.
Yeah.
So, and I just gamified it. I made it fun, and
Yeah.
I learned that no matter what the knockbacks, what the setbacks are, you just keep going.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine the running away from dogs is hitting a resignation point there. And then you mentioned a really nice point, which I like, is that you've been bouncing back between leadership, sales role, being in the trenches. So you
Mm.
actually have that real world feedback to be giving, not just that textbook approach. What made you first want to get into leadership? Because I know a lot of salespeople, they're just like, I want to sell, make my money, it's my own business, etc.
Mm.
I don't want to deal with people. What made you want to be taking that step to leadership?
That's a really interesting question. For me, Um, initially, it was an ego thing. Initially, it was a bit of an ego thing, and it was about it being a natural step up. And that's when I first started to think about leadership. But it was really when I started to see great leaders have the impact that they had on people's lives, and great leaders who were also role models. And I wanted to emulate that. Um, and I felt that also is a great way to be able to scale what you've learned and pass on that to others. And I think that there's a natural inclination if you want to be a leader, why you want to be a leader. I think natural leaders, great leaders are natural leaders. You can't
Mm,
really teach that. There's like it's hard to articulate. There's a bit of a source there, an ingredient there. Like for example, I heard someone not too long ago being asked that same question, and for them it was more what I showed earlier, was more of the ego and the sort of seeing it as a
status.
progression thing, right? A statement thing. I think those are the wrong reasons. I think the right reasons are really about wanting to help others to be the best version of themselves, right? And
Yeah,
taking and finding that to be more rewarding, helping others achieving what they can achieve, finding that to be more rewarding than doing it for yourself.
yeah. No, I can definitely imagine that. You mentioned that the style is probably more of that ego kind of aspect. If you started with more of an ego mentality, let's say, would you say your leadership styles transitioned throughout the years?
So I didn't. I would say when I initially wanted to go into leadership, that was the thing that was driving it. But before I stepped into leadership, I already changed my mindset. So I
Oh,
started for the right reasons. Um, so I wouldn't say that was so much the case for myself. But I think the danger of anyone going into leadership with that kind of goal is that you will struggle to get fellowship because people will see that you're in it for yourself rather than for them.
yeah.
That's really the crux of it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I can imagine in that regard. And what's the general style you like to take with your leadership? Because I've been in sales orgs where there's leadership that's actually never been in the trenches, being a salesperson. They went through being a sales manager and then becoming a VP of sales, etc. They've never actually been there selling actively in market. What's been your approach in coming in as a leader and supporting the sales team?
Yeah, sure. So I think I remember once a manager of mine, Samir, back in Ghana when I was at Ghana, when I was still an AE in the Benelux region. Um, he said to me that leadership is about inspiring, leading, and coaching, and for me that stuck with me. It really is about those three things because that's what's going to allow you to guide people to become the best version of themselves, but also looking at it holistically, not just at work, so they can become great sellers, and they also learn how to they develop confidence and learn to live well as well from a health perspective, from a completely holistic perspective. And the most effective way to lead is to be yourself and to lead by example. And but also if I break that down, um, because I went through an interview process not too long ago. It made me reflect and consolidate how I actually lead, like put it down onto paper. And that reflection was really, really powerful. And I advise anyone and everyone to do that, like, once a year or whatever. But for me, it comes down to six different types of leadership, if you like. One is transformational, servant, coaching, strategic, democratic, and results oriented. Those are the six different styles of leadership that I practice, if you like.
Yeah. And how do you try to combine the best practices of, say, all of them into a unique way in a day-to-day practice?
Yeah, it's situational, really. So if I take, for example, transformational leadership, that's very much about guiding people to identify their why, their sense of purpose, if you like, and helping them to then tie those goals back to their what they need to achieve in business in order to achieve those things in their personal lives, short term, medium term, long term goals. Understanding what makes people tick is foundational to getting the best out of people. And typically, a person's why, a person's purpose, sits right next to their biggest trauma. So you've got to understand what that is in a natural way as quickly as possible. And I do things like, I share personal stories. I'm always sharing stories of other great AEs, of clients, of my past mistakes, because, again, I like to lead by example. And that's really key to building trust, credibility, and then ultimately fellowship. I think inspiring people, for example, by wowing them in front of clients, show them what good looks like. Reward things like innovation, creative thinking. Um, Give people a platform when they've taken a risk and it's paid off, to show people that it's okay to take risks, but learn from them where you make those mistakes.
Yeah.
But also, if you're a new leader, for example, you've got to come in and think about, okay, what are the quick wins that I can get? How do you help people play to win, to win, right? By design. For example, um, helping somebody really prepare for a meeting and helping them understand that if you don't prepare, you're preparing to fail, right? Um, but part of transformational leadership is also instilling discipline in people, helping them live and breathe the building those right habits. Because I remember one of the best salespeople I ever met, who was a coach to former company Mike Gartner, Tom Kinsman. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he was already in his I think late in the 70s, but amazing, amazing salesperson. Started at Xerox, smashed it in his 20s back in the day.
Yeah.
And he taught us something called the common denominator to success. And in that, what the biggest takeaway for me was successful people do by habit what failures don't like to do. So consistency is really underpinning that, right? So that's the very, very big thing. But also mindset from a point of view of, I constantly preach and practice, like think big or go home. I preach and practice accountability, and help people own their business. You've got to put that ownership on them, and you've got to put that accountability on them. Everything that does happen, kudos to them. Everything that doesn't happen, they're accountable for that. So that's one example of transformational leadership.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And you mentioned that common denominator. as a sales leader, do you look at your team and try to have the same type of person everywhere? Or would you prefer to have one creative business developer versus one more ruthless challenger type of business developer?
So there there are profiles of people that you want to not compromise on, right? So if you look at things like how smart they are, how coachable they are, how driven they are, what level of experience do you know you need in order for them to be successful in those roles? Those are non-negotiables, right? But also, when I say intelligence, is intelligence from an IQ perspective, because sales is at least half science, but also from an emotional perspective, emotional intelligence perspective, because art is also has an artful side to it. So
Yeah.
these are absolute non-negotiables. There's no diversity away from that. To add to that, there are diversity of mindsets is a good thing. Diversity of boys and girls, I think, is a very, very good thing. Diversity of maybe different levels of experience, it can also be a very, very good thing. So that's that. So I do think you need to mix it up in those areas to have a well-rounded team.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And around the when you ask the why, I'm sure you've hired many people throughout your time. What's maybe some common whys that you've seen these actually make the best types of salespeople? Because the obvious one, everyone say they just really want to make money, but it's always a bit deeper than just making money.
Yeah, for me, if anybody's biggest why is making money is a red flag, because when in times of adversity, it's just not going to be enough. The drive there is going to be very limited. Usually the whys are come across as very, very silly little things. Like I have sort of two big whys, and I'll share one of them. I remember in my early 20s, my mum and I were visiting family friends that we've known for most of our lives. And to give you a bit of context, my mum's friend's son, who's a friend of mine, Gad, he by 20 was already a self-made millionaire. He he advanced school 2 years. I think he graduated his
Oh,
degree at the age of 19, PhD by early 20s, right, in genetic science. And that's what I was going to be compared with. And basically, my mum's friend asked my mum, how's Bash doing in front of me? I was present, and then my mum's like, yeah, he's doing really well. He's a businessman now, and and then my mum's friend turned kind of like to me and said, Bash is no businessman, and then that seed was like planted there and there. So I'm like, I haven't actually had the opportunity to tell her that, unfortunately, and it's too late. That was a funeral a couple of years ago.
oh,
But she really indirectly, I would say, inspired me. So it's often these little emotional things, it's whether it's proving someone wrong, it's competing with a sibling. Sometimes it's competing with your parents, or maybe even rising to your parents' expectations. For example, it's always a very emotional thing,
yeah,
not a rational thing that drives people the most, in my experience.
definitely no. I completely resonate with that aspect of people trying to push you down, so you just do stuff to fight back. Did you end up becoming a millionaire off the back of that?
We don't talk money, right? So
We
yeah,
don't talk
I mean,
money.
yeah, I do okay for myself. Yeah,
That's good. That's good. That's the key thing. Aim for the moon, and you go from there.
yeah.
Great. And then in terms of actually managing the people, you said you lead by example. What are some examples where leaders can be doing to be showing their team this is the best practices, this is what you should be doing? Do you actively take a sales call for a team member? What do you do?
Yeah, so maybe going to one of the other coaching styles, which is leadership styles, which is coaching style. This is something that I get complimented on a fair bit. So firstly, it starts with, and I'll come to the example, but firstly, it really starts with working with people to understand that if they start to think they're ripe, they'll rot. And if they continue to be ripe, or green rather, they will ripe. So you've got to demonstrate, you've got to lead by example with humility. And a way of doing that is by always seeking feedback from all of those around you. Because pride, in my view, makes us very artificial, right? And humility is what makes us real. So my coaching style in general is show, share, observe. Something I learned from I've got a surname, Andrew, will come back to me later. Um, and it could and really for me, like for example, a new joiner coming in, I would actually lead those first 2 or 3 conversations until we get to a deal. And then when we get to the second or third deal, we would share, we would prepare, we would agree on who owns what part of the process, the conversation, asking what parts, what particular questions. And then we would, of course, catch up later to wash up. And then once they've done a couple of deals in that way, I would then sit back and observe. And this is kind of the hardest part, really, because you've got to sit there and let people make mistakes. It's like parenting. You've got to let your kids make mistakes. Otherwise, you're stealing that experience from them. So
Yeah.
you've got to be very selective about when to step in or not, unless it's going to cost you the deal, right? Unless it's something like that. So those are examples of how I would lead by example. Like if I wanted people to be coachable, I have to lead by example, show them that I'm coachable, and that pays off dividends because you've got to have people who are highly coachable. Even you might even have situations where you have strong performers, but if they're uncoachable, then they've limited the ceiling for themselves.
Yeah,
So be humble and ask for feedback continuously.
definitely. I really like that. I really like that you're actually actively being in the sales cycle, showing, doing, and then giving parts back to them for them to take over. I don't think many sales leaders do that. And with that, I guess there's a difficulty when you deal with low performers, right? How do you go about that in terms of the leadership style? There's a lot of cutthroat sales organizations where it's like you have 3 months performance plan, that's it. How do you approach that situation?
Hmm. I remember when I was new as a leader and I inherited a team, and my um, the manager who I succeeded, predecessor, um, we went through everyone in the team. I think there were 7 individuals at the time, and there were 2 people that he highly recommended that I fire immediately. And then my immediate response was why, and we went through that, and then I asked him, why did you not fire them then? Right? So we had that little conversation. And as a new leader, I think we'll all make that potential mistake of thinking you can rescue everyone. In this particular case, that was the case, right? Both people are now doing very, very well. One is a senior channel manager at Salesforce. Another one's working for a Formula One company and doing very well for themselves as a client partner there. But they were successful in that role. They actually reached President's Club 2 years consecutively. So having said that, I think as a leader, you gotta have courage to challenge people and to have tough conversations. And for me, ultimately, whether I decide to continue investing in someone or not is based on how coachable they are and how driven they are. And I've had situations where people lacked one of those things, and you've just got to pull the cord, even though it's going to upset a couple of clients, etc. It's the right thing to do because what you permit as a leader, you're effectively promoting. You're telling people it's okay to not be performing. It's okay to behave in that way. So you've got to have the courage to end it
Yeah,
and then let people know why you ended it as well. You
yeah,
will actually be surprised by how much respect you get from the rest of the team for that. It sets the bar, the floor bar high.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. It's like because I've had team members where they've left, they ended up getting fired, no one knows why, where they're underperforming, was it this reason, XYZ. So I think that's a good both telling the person that you're cutting off why you fired them so they can have a reality check for the next role, but also the team so they know where the boundaries are.
Yeah, yeah. I think you also owe it to people if they're in a role where they're unlikely to be successful. Like for example, guy I worked with, Lewis. Um, he's in a role where primarily it required a lot of hunting,
Mm,
and it was I've made some hiring mistakes, right? I don't think anyone has not made hiring mistakes if they're going to be honest about it. And but it wasn't a it was at the time the best that we can get. So I took the plunge reluctantly somewhat, but I learned that the hunting instinct, that killer instinct, wasn't there. And I was just like, dude, we can, he was coachable, he was driven, but that element was still missing. So I just simply advised him very, very frankly, if I were you, I would go into more of an account management role. That's where you can play to your strengths. And what's required here is it's never going to work out. So it's in your interest to go and do something else. Right. And I think that's really how you want to be thinking about it, especially if you're lacking a bit of leadership courage. You owe that to them. You owe the truth to them. You're in the best position to have had plenty of data points. So you've been able to observe them and be able to give that to them as feedback and advice moving forward. Whether
yeah,
they take it or not is up to them, but you've made the decision already by that point.
yeah, definitely. And an interesting point, you've been in the sales, you've been in the trenches, you've been a leader as well. How do you handle people, well, I'm sure you've had this, where they blame the territory or what they're doing on the prospects? And sometimes I've seen cases where literally someone's moved from their territory and they go to President's Club where they didn't even hit target the year before. How
Mm.
much do you analyze that situation? Because I know some leaders will just say every territory is the same, you can sell and hit presidents anywhere.
Yeah, so this is where I would apply it some results-oriented leadership, right? Where um, to drive accountability, you've got to put that responsibility on people. So, for example, if somebody comes and tells me that their territory is um, if they can't see a win there, I would listen to them. I would really hear them out because there might be a genuine
Yeah,
thing there for them. And then I would actually sit down and review with them. Right, okay, so let's map out your territory. Show me your plan for how you're going about mapping out your territory. And in most cases, straight away, you can see that they have done a below average job there. And then they themselves will start to see that, okay, they'll be embarrassed by it, right?
yeah,
That they would come to you with that notion. So that's an example of how I would deal with it. So I would actually inspect what they've already tried to do and therefore what they haven't done, like white space analysis and so on. I would look at their messaging. I would look at um, what has worked, what hasn't worked, because with accountability, there's no room for excuses.
yeah. I like that. I definitely like that. And it seems like you're a very caring type of leader. It's like you can actually listen to the people. I can tell by just the way you're mentioning names and you know where they've gone on to places. What do you think's made you this type of person in terms of caring, following up with people that you've been working with, managing, and knowing their careers where they've gone to?
Deep, I like it. I think initially, if I go back to maybe 2013 when I stepped into leadership at that time, it was the realization that other people's success is your success. Um, so initially it was that kind of way of thinking, but then it wasn't until the end of 2013, I remember being there It was Christmas Eve. We were working, and we were closing. And there was one guy, Andrew Bruce, who was one deal away from hitting President's Club, and it was late afternoon, 3-ish or something like that. And we only had a couple of working days really left in the bag to play with. And it was a housing association. And we know these guys are going to be logging off very, very soon. But fortunately, these guys in particular were actually working on Christmas Eve. And I remember going up to him and said, right, Andrew, what's going on with this deal? Because you need it, right? He's like, yeah, man, I'm doing everything I can. I'm like, okay, so what's the last thing you've done? And he went, explained. And then what we did, we were, the whole sales team was seated together. I pulled my chair, sat right next to him. And long story short, we came up with a message where we were bringing in all the different stakeholders into one place. Because what I realized with his approach was that it was very fragmented. He was dealing with multiple stakeholders, he was multi-threaded, but he wasn't bringing the whole thing together. So we drafted a message that went out to everyone, and within, I can't remember how long it was, but pretty quickly on the day, they said, okay, we're going to have an internal conversation. They did, and they came back with positive news. And then when we came between Christmas and New Year, the deal came in, and I remember how it felt. And even though I had already made 3 Presidents Club myself, that him making his felt better than any of mine. So, and I realized at that moment that, okay, I do actually care. Even though initially it was like just more the rational, view of other people's success is your success. This time I realized it's actually natural. I wasn't playing a game. So I think it's a natural thing, whether or not you care about people. What drives people to care? I think, it's more a question for somebody who studies psychology.
Yeah,
But yeah,
psychologist.
that's at least from my personal experience when I realized it.
That's nice. You gave him a very good Christmas gift.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I like that story. Do you mind sharing maybe some of those tips around, you said you mapped out all these stakeholders, put in a really good email. Why did you do that? What was the reasoning behind it?
I mean, the why was to get him over the line. The from a more technical sales point of view, it was simply that the organization or the people that he was dealing with weren't what he didn't bring the conversation together in one place. And I think you can have all these multiple conversations with people one to one, but if you don't have a strong enough champion in the account that brings everyone together, um, you've got to you've got to think of other ways to do it. And in that particular situation, that was the case, and a simple email, bringing everyone together in one conversation. Like we forced them to have that conversation. That was the technical why, if you like. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question? Or
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. I was just really interested in that aspect. Especially on Christmas, you would think most people would have out of offices on the 24th.
yeah, so the urgency was there, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember the same guy, Tom Kinsman, who I referred to earlier. I remember once he made the statement that in a year there are only 20 real sales days. And at first I was very dubious about that statement. Um, but it explains somewhat why quite often people do a lot of business towards the end of a month, quarter, year, because suddenly they have to, and it drives that urgency, and then that urgency um, gets them to pull in resources and support, gets them to be more creative, gets them to be more courageous, and that was an example of it.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And final thoughts on the podcast. You've been a seller, you've been a coach, you're a leader as well. I'm sure you're being hit up by every salesperson selling you some kind of sales enablement services, go to market. Now, as a sales leader, budget holder, what do you do to really say, okay, I'll take a meeting with this person, being in the shoes of a decision maker? Because as a salesperson, probably don't care. You outreach to everyone, there's a pain point you're trying to solve, etc. You're ruthless, you're the hunter. But as the budget holder, you probably get annoyed getting 100 emails a day at this point. So what can really make someone stand out for you to take the meeting there, given you've been in their shoes, you are in their shoes, and you're also coaching people to do the same?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I'll give you the answer, and I'll make a sort of a point of it as well in terms of why there's learnings from that as well. So I probably today put at least 10 different people in spam on a daily basis. And that's just me, right? If you're higher up, I can imagine it's a lot higher than that, especially now with Gen AI in full swing on the PG front. So it has to be personalized, right? And it starts with a subject line, whether or not you open it in the first place. And then you can very quickly see if it's personalized or if it's spam, effectively, right? I think it's really one or the other.
Yeah,
There's no real in middle ground here. So I would look for messages that I have coached others and do myself in terms of outreach, right? I look for the same qualities there. That great subject line, highly personalized, you're adding value, you're demonstrating um, you're demonstrating real thoughtfulness in terms of providing real life examples of others that have benefited from whatever it is that you're offering, but also why it would benefit you in your situation based on some understanding and research,
yeah,
a strong call to action, right? And it's got to be concise, right? If remember the saying, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. So it's got to be concise because the first thing I do if I do open the email, I'll see how long it is, and like, okay, yeah, too long,
yeah, yeah,
out. Or if it's short enough, I'll read the top line and go to the bottom to see what they want, and then if it's good enough, I'll read the whole thing. Right?
yeah,
That's generally how eyes move when you're opening emails. So I look for those things, right? So I don't want to be a hypocrite of that. And then what has helped me learn what doesn't work very much, right? It validates those things.
yeah,
Um, and I share sometimes examples of bad emails, but there's so many that you don't really need to share that many examples. But there are probably one in, I would say, 50 that actually I would open and read fully.
yeah,
Um, and those are the ones that demonstrated what I talked to earlier. But what made me, but I have seen more creative ways as well, whether it's videos, whether it's highly researched content, highly personalized, something that is different from your usual, something that is attention grabbing, name dropping,
yeah,
can be effective as well. And then those good examples I do share and I learn from, right?
yeah,
So, and I think that's a nice position to be in where you're selling and being sold to,
yeah. I
right?
can imagine.
Yeah, and I think it's on those people who are being sold to share good and bad examples with others to
Yeah,
learn from as well.
definitely.
And I think right now email has become so much less effective. LinkedIn has actually become more effective,
Yeah,
I would say, but having a multi-channel approach is really the way to go, right?
definitely.
Cold calls with, hey, have you got a minute, or hi, or how are you, or whatever. The only thing you're thinking is like, who's this person? How can I get them off as quickly as
Yeah,
possible? Whereas taking more creative approaches, like you're calling someone and you're saying, hey, I've only got a minute. You're the one who's
yeah,
saying, I've only got a minute, right?
yeah,
They're thinking, what the hell? So straight away, you've differentiated um,
yeah.
and you've set that peer-to-peer thing rather than being on the back foot
Below
immediately,
them. Yeah,
rather than putting yourself on the back foot. So those are some examples.
nice. Nice. I'm happy my email got opened by you and you responded to it. What's one type of subject? You mentioned personalized subject. I've seen a lot of AI can personalize. There's a lot of, let's say, BS personalization. Hey, I saw you went to this uni, right? What kind of personalization do you look for? What kind of subject line would intrigue you? Because a lot of people go with the basic first, your name, and then something.
I'll give you an example that comes to mind because I still like to keep I still like to stay in the game and I still do selling, right? I still have currently I have a personal number as well as a leadership number.
Yeah.
So yesterday, for instance, I messaged somebody at a social media company, knowing that they used to work at another social media company, sorry, not social media company, but more of a big tech firm, who are a client of mine. And in that subject line, I put RE regarding your ex-employer, right?
Okay.
I can't see them not opening that out of like, what the hell? Like some sort of, it'll
Yeah,
provoke a reaction of some kind.
of
So
course.
that's an example of being creative. And I think that the subject line, my advice to anyone, and really what I've seen works most effectively is do the subject line last, right? Do the whole email, get it to 100%, and then do the subject line. The only thing a subject line needs to do is to get people to open it. Subject
Yeah,
line's objective met, right?
yeah, yeah. No, I really like that, definitely. And do you pick up cold calls?
Occasionally, only if I'm expecting a call from someone. Like the other day, I picked up because I thought it was my car garage,
Yeah.
but it was a cold call. What I generally do is respond with a text saying, "Who's this, please?" If it's a
Okay.
mobile number, if it's a landline, um, uh, only if I'm at loose end type of thing, but rarely, shall
Hmm.
we say? Yeah, myself. But um, that's not to discourage people from cold calling, right? That's because I'm in the game, kind of thing.
Cool.
It's
Yeah.
different, somewhat. But also, if I do pick up, I don't give people a hard time. I tend to give people a little bit of feedback
Yeah.
at cold call because I don't, there's a little bit of what goes around comes around. There's a little, I feel like I would be a hypocrite if I
Yeah.
treated them badly.
Definitely. No, I've seen a lot of sales leaders, sales managers where they say I don't like cold calls, but they teach their teams to do it. So
Yeah, yeah, it's
it was
hypocrisy.
really weird.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, you've got. I do occasionally for that reason. Otherwise, I generally wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you said you send a text. I've personally sometimes pitched through the text. What would you respond if someone pitches on the text like to who's this and you're saying, hey, I'm calling from Gartner, for example?
If it's so I think with a cold call, what I've seen works best is making it a warm call.
Yeah.
And by that I mean in your first outreach, let's say you're delivering some value. A second outreach, you might be also delivering some value, whether it's inviting them to a webinar, sharing some use cases, sharing some facts about their industry, their business that they perhaps didn't know, information that you had that was hard to come by for them, um, white papers, and so on. And then in that message, rather than actually your call to action could be not a call to action, it could be, I'm going to drop you a line tomorrow at 3 p.m. So
Yeah.
you've set it up so it's a warm call. So if you do it in that kind of way to begin with, you by definition change it from being a cold call to something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I wouldn't do it as a first step.
Yeah.
Right? I think of pipe generation as really being a science and an art in that you want to have multiple steps there. Um, I read somewhere that the eighth step touch point is the most effective, for
Yeah.
example. I haven't gone to this to the
Oh, I saw something
of
like 12
measuring.
the other day now. So
Well, there you go. But I've also seen four-step campaigns be effective as well. So who knows really what's best? I think it's
I think now with all the email
circumstantial.
AI, low barrier has gone to more steps.
No, for sure, for sure. But I think email itself has become generic emails just don't really work that well, especially unless you're very transactional with a huge patch, then you can use an outreach or gong or whatever to do that. But I think I wouldn't want to be in a role doing that anyway,
Yeah.
right? So if you're in enterprise sales, you don't really want to be doing that. That's a no-no. So be thoughtful about the content. You could try top down, bottom up. Bottom up, each one has its pros and cons. Bottom up, you'll have more context. You'll be able to understand the language people use internally. You can reference that within your messaging to demonstrate that you have an understanding of their business. Because apparently, there are two things that customers hate the most about salespeople, and that's they don't know your business and that you're not listening. And if you can already demonstrate that you have an understanding of their business, you've eliminated one of those two things, right? People are not going to feel like, oh, I've got to educate this person on my
Yeah.
business. It's the same as quite often some people just don't buy from you because you're not set up on their books. They're not willing to go through the pain
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
taking you through
Yes.
the procurement process. And my theory is that procurement and legal deliberately make it difficult for people so they don't, ask to buy things unless it's really well thought through.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And to round off the podcast, what's one final thought or piece of advice for any other sales leaders out there?
One piece of advice. I would say is get to know your people. Get to know your people on a personal level. It gives you not only a good bond and respect um, in that relationship, but also if somebody's, you'll always have a good enough read of where somebody's mindset is at. I remember someone the other day sharing that typically people will leave 6 months after they first decided to leave.
Yeah,
Right, so you want to get an early read on these things. You want to be there. You want to be approachable. You want to be trusted. If they don't know you, it's hard for them to trust you. So yeah, so get to know your people.
definitely. I really like that. Well, pleasure having you as a guest today, Vash. Where can the people find you if they want to come and contact you more?
They can call me.
Yeah, I'll drop your number in the description so that you can have some cold call practice.
There you go. There you
No
go.
problem at all. But again, pleasure to have you as a guest on today's show.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Hopefully, we can have a part two soon on another topic. But
Let's
as for
do
that,
it.
that was an episode of Growthcast, and thanks so much.
Thank you.